Meeting of September 25th, 2025. I'm juror number 7. And just glad to be back in the real world and not in the courtroom. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. We have a roll call, please.
Thank you. Starting with Director Devlin.
Here.
Judicic.
Here.
Hernandez.
Here.
Maston.
Here.
Verdoni.
Here.
Vice Chair Parr.
Present.
Chair Rabbit.
Here.
And President Cochran.
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum. You are also a committee of the whole. Also, we have Directors Garbarino, Hill, and Multi-Peters. Thanks for everybody joining us this morning.
Great, wonderful. We'll move on to item number 3, which is the ratification of previous actions by the Auditor Controller. Just to note, the PFM report starts on page 7. The entire item 3 is pages 5 through 26. And I believe is Monique here? There she is. Welcome, Monique.
Good morning. So I've been looking forward to this meeting. Hope you have too. I promised to come back and talk about what the Fed decided to do at their September meeting, which was last week. So I'm going to keep y'all in suspense, although y'all probably already know. I do want to talk about a couple of things first. So as you know, we've been talking about the Fed and their requirement to really thread a needle between the two parts of the risk in the economy. One, the labor market, and 2, inflation, and how they were going to act. In the midst of that, we also had a lot of political things happening in the background, mainly President Trump looking to remove Lisa Cook as a Federal Reserve Board member, and in the interim, appointing a new member to the board. So let's talk about that a little bit. I am looking through the packet, and I'm going to start on page 10, which essentially shows that yields declined month over month, and a lot of this was in anticipation of the Fed finally reducing the Fed funds target rate at some point this year. And so you can see the 2-year Treasury, which is again is a good benchmark for where we buy investments on average for the district, declined about 34 basis points. Now, on the next page, we highlight the 2 things that the Fed was focused on. 1, price changes, and 2, unemployment. Now, I will say that prices in general, particularly in core services and tariff-sensitive categories, continue to be high. Inflation is expected to remain elevated, and we're starting to see things like producer prices and consumer prices increasing, and that shows that folks are beginning to pass costs on to the consumer. However, the labor market, which is the other side of the Fed coin, is under particular pressure. And so August job growth has been weak. The unemployment rate continues to rise. And the Fed, this is the highlight, actually reduced the Fed funds target rate by 1/4 of a basis point, so by 25 basis points. Now, what does this tell us? 1, it tells us that the Fed is more concerned about the unemployment market than they are about inflation and prices. And so that 25 basis point cut is intended to support growth in the labor market. Now, with regard to the political pressure on the Fed, it was very clear that the board as a whole was not succumbing to the pressure to be more aggressive on interest rate cuts. There was a hope by the presidential administration that the Fed would push for a 50 basis point cut in September. That was rejected at large by pretty much all the board members except for the new one that was recently appointed. Board member Myron was the only member, quite frankly, pushed for a 50 basis point cut. And it's notable that the other members who were Trump appointees, Waller and Bowman, also did not support a 50 basis point cut. So across the board, members were comfortable with that 25 basis point cut. There's some suggestion that we may see 2 more rate cuts this year. I'll note Myron, the recently appointed board member, is pushing for perhaps another full percentage point. But again, that's not widely supported at all by board members. So I think that if there's any additional rate cuts, we may see 2 more this year, and that's as aggressive as I think we're expected to see the Fed. Other good news in the market on page 12 of the physical packet is that retail sales surprised to the upside in August. And so although personal consumption and spending is slowing, it's still holding up pretty well. That's important because it suggests that consumers are spending in spite of uncertainty, are spending in spite of increased prices. And as consumer spending is such a large part of our growth, that's a positive. So we may be able to land this plane, or the Fed may be able to land this plane. I already talked about rate cuts, so I'll move us forward in your packet to talk about what we're doing with the portfolio. And so I'll land us on page 18 of your packet, which shows the district's portfolio at the end of August. I want to continue to reassure you that in spite of the noise in the economy and the noise in the political arena, we remain focused, as I said last month, on fundamental analysis of the issuers in the portfolio, of the cash flow requirements of the district. And that has served us very well over the years that we've been managing the portfolio and in this environment. I will continue to highlight the diversification of the issuers in the district's portfolio. As we seek out new investment opportunities, we continue to rest on our comfort level with the underlying fundamentals of issuers and their ability to repay debt. We are working closely with district staff to ensure that you have adequate liquidity for your operating needs. And the portfolio overall has performed very well. We've been able to lock in very attractive yields over the last month as yields have been coming down. We do anticipate that future purchasing opportunities will be at lower yields, but that's just a reflection of the market as yields decline. But the investments that we purchased over the past few years will continue to provide good income opportunities as rates decline. So the overall yield of the portfolio at month end is about 3.98%. That includes the assets that you have in overnight vehicles like CAMP. We're going to continue to work with staff on investment and cash flows on a going forward basis. And we're really comfortable with where we are right now. I'll pause there for questions.
Are there any questions of Monique? Director Hill?
Yeah. As long as I've been watching this over the years, the asset-backed securities are almost always automobile companies and automobile like that. Aren't there any other kinds of businesses or anything that has that same kind of opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the different types of asset backs that we tend to buy tend to be automobiles, credit card receivables, and also asset-backed securities backed by leases. Things like farm equipment, big office equipment. Also, those are also leases that we tend to buy. We find that auto leases are very reliable. And oddly enough, the reason for that is people tend to pay their car notes before other types of obligations. So more reliable, stronger credit profile. We do a lot of research into the sort of underlying borrowers. And so there are certain types of auto receivables that we tend to like more than others. But again, I think the payback and the credit quality of auto receivables tends to be very high. The same can be said about leases as well, equipment leases.
Yeah, I've been reading in The Economist and Bloomberg, and they're showing the pricing relative to vehicles is really weird right now. You probably done it too. radically, and that's where my concern is that will have a big effect from that industry.
Yeah, I will say that the cost of automobiles during the pandemic rose significantly. I think we're going to see auto prices continue to rise just because of the tariff environment and the cost of producing those vehicles and importing them. I recently read, for example, that some automakers are just planning to remove production because of that from here and the cost of importing parts, etc. And so there will be some impact on the way these deals are structured, on the way auto loans are structured. We watch that very carefully. We actually have a separate credit team that just focuses on the asset-backed sector to really dig into the structures. And so we do look at that carefully and make sure that we're comfortable with the risk and the underlying pool and the cost of those loans.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? Thank you so much. Always appreciate it.
All right, thank you. You all have a good day.
The cost of car payments are closing in on mortgages and rents.
No, I'm gonna.
Yeah. Thank you. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on this particular?
We have no speakers for this item.
Okay, this is an action item, so I will ask for the committee's motion for the ratification of these items.
So moved.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. And, we can do a voice vote, correct? We could do a voice vote. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
So anyone opposed, please say no. Hearing no opposition, that does pass unanimously. Thank you. Moving on then to the next item, which we have business, which is item 6, receive the updated 5- and 10-year financial projection. Jen?
Morning, Chair Rabbit. Welcome back. Members of the Finance Committee, I'm here to present your annual 5- and 10-year projections. As a reminder, this is an information item, so just needs to receive the report. Before we get started, I'd like to actually introduce you to Grant Martinez, who is back there. Actually, Grant, if you don't mind standing. He is our new Director of Budget and Financial Analysis. So he has been working on the bulk of this report, so big thank you for him to crank a lot of numbers and a lot of details out. He's been with us a little over 2 months and has hit the ground running, so just wanted to acknowledge him if you haven't met him. See him around a lot more. He's down on the first floor if you want to see him. All right, let's get into it. So the projection item you have before you, as you know, we produce an annual document and that really is just a snapshot of the district's financial health in a moment in time. So this projection only takes into account policies that we know today. So any future policy decisions, tolls, fares, service levels outside of what the board is currently approved isn't reflected into this report. So it doesn't predict any future direction. It merely just lets you know if you make no other decisions, this is kind of the long-term financial impact of the district as it looks like today. As a reminder, we are a fee-for-service agency, so the model's always been as the cost of living increases and inflation rises over time for costs for the district, the revenues and toll and fares also need to rise with that. This projection only assumes the current toll increase plan that we have that'll go through fiscal year 28-29, and the fare increases are only projected through fiscal year 27-28. So just kind of as a bearing. I'd like to start by talking about the reserve. So if you want to turn to page 28, the district's historically grown and maintained reserves for capital projects and operating expense emergencies. And as you can see from the graph here on page 28, we have a very healthy reserve level that we've been pretty disciplined in making sure that we tuck away for those long-term projects. The next section talks more about the use of the reserve over the projection timeline. In the first 5 years of this projection, it's estimated the district capital need will be about $582 million. The majority of that is the contract one, as we've been talking a lot about for the seismic retrofit. That accounts for about $260 million of that need right now. So basically, as I said, this was your savings account all these years to fund major projects like this, and so we're very glad that we had that. And if you recall that once we start a project at least in our district financial discipline, we want to encumber all the district funds we need for it. So if you turn to page 29, this is always the graph that I know Joe and I had built over the years, that, you know, we have made a decision not to be one of those pay-as-you-go agencies for capital projects. So we don't try to figure out on a yearly basis what we need, because as you know, we're capital intensive. It takes a lot of time to raise that money. So if you look at the result of this graph, if you look at the red line represents what I would say is our fiscal policy, that after the first year, any projects that have been started, committed, and ready to go the district funds are set aside. So you can see that red line has been pretty much committed and then some. However, the blue line is really what we want you to focus on. It's really kind of the more realistic cash flow of how we think these capital projects are going to pay out over time. So it's been different than in years past, because as you know, with the seismic retrofit, that is just a huge commitment. So you're just going to see that on paper. But I feel like the next 5 years, you can see our cash flow is being managed pretty well on the capital project side. And we'll continue also to fine tune not just the seismic project pays, but some of the other projects that are in the 5-year capital plan that maybe on the cash flow might shift on its timeline. So wanted to kind of go through that. But also just being acknowledged that, you know, the reserve levels can really only grow if the operating budgets are balanced. So there needs to be enough funding to balance both the operating fund and the capital reserves. So if you turn to the next page, on page 30, which is really kind of the meat of it, you will see that our operating shortfall now over 5 years is $382 million, and over the 10 years is $1 billion. As a reminder, on the cost side, the main cost drivers are going to be your salaries and benefits every year going up as those increase. And what's a little bit more significant this year is the major projects that we intend on doing in the next 10 years. The depreciation alone, along with the capital contribution, is going to significantly rise kind of the need over the next 10 years. And so I think even though that expense side has always been pretty steady, it's always going to go up. The revenue side, as a reminder, there's only 3 years of a toll increase right now in this projection. There's only 2 years for transit. We were very conservative in the traffic and rider for traffic, as we're seeing maybe that last 13% really not busting through, but we're hoping as San Francisco comes back that will change on the revenue side. This also assumes in this projection we're only going to be back about 56% of where we were in 2019 levels for bus, and about 71% of 2019 levels for ferry. So obviously our service levels have greatly changed, but again, the projection is really a moment in time. So that's kind of our assumption. If you did nothing else and we knew nothing else, that's what it would look like. So at the end of the day, we have unusually an operational shortfall, but we always do, because again, costs rise, revenues are flat. At the end of the day, it's a little different this year, is that we don't normally are projecting a large deficit or a shortfall in the capital need as well as in the operations. So we kind of even it out. As I say, you have one big savings account, you've got a lot of money to spend. How you want to spend it really on those choices is a different discussion, but this projection kind of assumes what you have in the bank and what your need is. So on the operating side, we're looking at a 5-year, $382 million shortfall, as we talked. And on the capital side, $582 million, so a total of $964 million and change. If we balance the operating budget, which includes putting money back into your capital reserves, as policy, $21 million a year traditionally, plus the depreciation of some of these major projects, we estimate right now we would need about an extra $10 million on top of what we're already saving for the capital, just to kind of get us through. So I think that looking at what we have in front of us, the appendices you'll see year by year, the assumptions we've done for the projection for this moment in time. And I always reiterate that this is a snapshot in time based on what we've already decided. If Joe were here, I can hear him right now, that this document is what we've always used as kind of this call to action, right? This is not necessarily this, doom and gloom, because the way our service is done, it's a fee for service, we're always going to have a deficit going out 5 years, given the assumption pages that we have. But I think on the other hand, the cash flow is looking pretty healthy for the next 5 years. And, we traditionally, and we will next month bring you the strategic plan. So as part of dovetailing with the projections, we kind of display what it's looking like in this moment in time. And then next month we'll come back with the strategic plan, give you some updates on what the staff is working on, and how we start chipping away at some of these shortfalls. Just to note out the meat of, it's just a summary, but the meat is really in the appendices. So if you're interested, you can see year by year on page 33, basically our assumptions and how the deficits fall out per year. But it's really starting at a $58 million deficit and growing from there every year. And we'll talk about it in the next item, but that is kind of the base that we know now without the one-time federal funding. And then in the other appendices, as you go through, it'll show the revenue detail and the assumptions that we've made. And then kind of the grant funding versus district funding is also in the appendices as a assumption. The second part of the seismic fund right now is assumed to be 65% grant funded. So that's just also an assumption that we've traditionally done in this projection. And then lastly, Appendix D is really our capital need as we go through to say if we didn't use our reserves, how much more would we need to raise? If we use all the reserves, how much more would we need to raise? In the past, we've been pretty healthy, but we are projecting out, trying to make sure we have funding for some of these major capital projects that are coming on board. And with that, I'm happy to answer or discuss anything further in this report.
Okay, Jennifer, Jens?
Yeah, just for the newer board members, we do this every year. It's, as Jennifer said, it's a call to action. For the record, every year we show a 5-year deficit and a 10-year deficit. This is not the largest that we've ever presented to the board, but it is one of the largest. And so just to kind of characterize it for the newer folks in the room, it's as Jennifer said, expenses go up every year. That's the assumption. Revenues don't because you haven't made decisions on it yet. But that this one is, like I said, one of the larger ones, but it's not the largest we've ever been confronted with. And next month, when Jennifer and her team present the strategic plan, they'll talk about all the baby steps we need to take to address this.
I've come to understand why we do this, but at the same time, I will say that seeing parentheses and seeing minus signs in a spreadsheet are always a little nerve-wracking.
Yes.
Director Maston. Yes.
The $400 million that was recently approved by the feds, is that factored into this already?
Absolutely.
Oh, what a shame. Okay.
Any other questions for Jennifer? That's Director Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jennifer, for your report. Coming from someone who doesn't have a huge, financial background, but I do have some time on this board. I don't recall either you or Joe ever really regretting the combination of projections that you use with the assumptions. Do you have concerns about any of the projections? Are we on point with them, and have we historically been? Are there any areas of concern for you regarding projections?
No, I think Joe and I actually built this one together, so it might be a little group thing. So I was like, yeah, it's great. I built it. But I do think, we took a different look this year for sure. I think it is different than in years past. I can't remember, maybe in 2002, 2003 was probably the last time we had this kind of conversation where at some point you're looking at your pot of money and you have a major capital project you need to fund that's really going to kind of deal with your cash flow. And normally we don't have a projected operation shortfall because we're pretty used to buttoning that up. On the other hand, I think when we get to the strategic plan and we start seeing how we're going to whittle away, that I think will make Chair Rabbit a little bit more comfortable to see that the operating you guys see it every time I talk about the budget, the operating shortfalls is on paper, and then you'll see in the next item we kind of whittle it down through the year. Because what we want to make sure you can aspire to in that budget and have policies for, we are on behind the scenes making sure that cash flow, we're very cognizant of what our bottom line really is on the cash flow. So as far as the projections, I think the only thing that we're going to do this fall to tighten up is we did that 10-year capital plan, but it was more of a needs assessment. And I think we'll fine tune the 5 years to see on the cash flow, given kind of the seismic retrofit is a reality, right? We're actually off and running on that. There's some sizable ones in some of your other areas too. We just want to make sure that the timing on one of those are realistic. We're very optimistic often in our plan, which is good. But when you guys start worrying about cash flow, I want to make sure that we kind of do that analysis as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One follow-up. With regard to the strategic plan that you're referring to, the strategic financial plan, is that covering 5 years? Is that covering 10 years? Or is it more focused on a specific project?
I think it's neither. Or if you want to answer, Dan.
I believe it was a 5-year plan when President Theriault led us through that journey, and so that was the intent of it. But we revisit it every year. We talk about progress, and I think the intent is that, at some point we'll want to do a new one. Generally, we've always done a new one at the end of the 5-year period, except when the pandemic hit. Then we said, all bets are off, and we're spending, one-time federal money, and we need to see how things settled out. When they settled out, then we did one under Director Theriault's leadership, and when the 5-year period of this one is up, I'm sure we'll do another one.
So we're reestablishing kind of a regular schedule. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Director Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to ask about the strategic plan also. I know you're going to bring things back. As I recall, and I haven't looked at that paper for a while, but the strategic plan was, in my view, overwhelming. It had so many different pieces to it. I would hope that when you bring back the analysis of the strategic plan next month, that as a board, and maybe it starts with finance, but we look at those and see if maybe we need to make some in-flight adjustments based on what our financial position is now, and based on what the seismic retrofit's going to cost us, and based on the fact that our federal money isn't flowing in the way it was. So that's just me, but I'm going to be prepared to look at it and say, gosh, that was a great idea 3 years ago, but it might not be such a great idea now. Let's see if we need to abort it, or do we need to put it forward for the next strategic plan. I always thought it was interesting and incredibly, I don't know the word to use, but sort of blindsided for us to think that we could do that many things. But I was always excited that we could try. So that's just me. Thank you.
And I think the strategic plan is different from years past if you've been on the board for a while. It started out, originally we had a strategic financial plan. So I think this is different in that this strategic plan is holistic. It is a full board strategic plan, and a component of it is financial. But I think with that lens, of course, since finance is going to be running the assessment on the, you'll get that slant whether you want it or not.
True that. Any other questions of Jennifer? Please, Director Anderson.
Thank you. Just a comment to build on Director Parr's comment. I thought the holistic strategic plan, I like how you described that, Jennifer, was a very good effort. But at the time, I felt like we needed to prioritize the actions in it. And so that would be my suggestion, is to take it and look at the components and prioritize them based on where they are now. As it was a listing of things we could consider. But I think it could use some sharpening, and that would be my suggestion.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? I just think that planning in our current era of chaos is a challenge. But I do appreciate the fact that having that holistic approach, but then going back and looking every year and trying to anticipate the changes that have occurred, and including the additional costs for projects and whatnot, is an opportunity that we all have, and I'm sure we'll have better and more thorough discussions here in the future. So thank you for that. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak on this particular item?
We have no speakers for this item.
This is another action item to accept this 5 and 10 year financial projections. So I'll look for my colleagues for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. And all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Is there anyone opposed? Please say no. Hearing no opposition, that does pass unanimously. Thank you again. Thank you, Jennifer. Moving on to 7, the status report in the fiscal year 25-26 budget. Back to you.
All right, I think this is a good dovetail. I apologize, I thought that was an information item, so thank you for receiving the prior report. So item number 7, on the status report for the budget. If you turn to page 47, I think this helps dovetail why we do this on an annual. So when you see the projections, you now have an annual snapshot of the budget. Again, on the top, we started out with a $58.2 million deficit. With the one-time funding, we are down to $23.7 million. This now is after 2 months. You can kind of scroll down to the bottom. We are technically 17. We've gone from $23 million in the hole to $17 million in the hole. But I always try to make sure that you look at that unrealized market gain, because I always say that's on paper. So if that changes, which it does every month, if you cash it out today, you'd be $19.3 million shortfall, but still less than 23.7. So that is the goal, to keep whittling that down. Those of you that have seen this throughout the year, it tends to whittle down because we do have, again, everything in there as an aspirational budget. And we did pretty well last year. We came into single digits. So as a shortfall. So that is our goal again this year. Happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Once again, looking at my colleagues, any questions? Being none, why don't we just move it on then, Jennifer?
Okay. Page 55 is your review of traffic and tolls. I always turn to page 57 that you can look at all 3 businesses. And again, we are up in ridership as well as revenues. The last couple of months, Chair Rabbit, I've just been kind of explaining the difference between the ridership and some of the revenues, because the percentages are not apples to apples, but we are catching up on some things from our partners, which is a good thing. So it's a moment in time. So for tolls, we have some payments that we were trying to make sure we got from the DMV, quite frankly. So that is a catch up for this month. In the bus and ferry, a lot of it is timing on how the fare money comes in, mainly on the Clipper side. So glad they are all up, but that is why it's not apples to apples, and happy to answer any questions on this if you have them. But all 3 modes are up, and that's good news for us.
That's good news, and I'll look to my colleagues. Any questions for Jennifer on this particular item? We'll take public comment in total as we move forward, but why don't we move on then to item number 9, which is the monthly review of the financial statements.
Yep, and this really is just your cash flow. Again, on page 63, you can see that we're 7.7 up from what we're spending year to date to what we're getting in revenues. Obviously, some of that is funds that we get in quarterly, so we will continue to look at that. Any questions?
Anyone? Being no hands raised. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And is there any public comment on the last 3 items, which is the status report for the fiscal year 25-26 budget, the monthly review, the tolls, traffic, and bus and ferry patronage and fares, or the monthly review of the financial statements?
We have no speakers for those items, and we have no speakers under public comment.
Perfect. And at that point, we're at the end of our agenda. And can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. Motion second. Hearing no opposition. We are adjourned.